So first thing to start off is you were first a pastor, and then you became...
Actually, I was first in communications. I did radio and television, then pastor, then politics.
And then into politics, right.
Yeah.
Very interesting change from religion to politics. So what motivated that change, and, what's in politics for you?
A lot of it was sort of a process for me that I was looking at all the social pathologies that were going on in people's lives. Because as a pastor, it's the only job I know in the world where you see people at their best and at their worst. And there is no human condition that you don't personally observe. Talking to teenage girls who were pregnant, hadn't told their parents yet, they talked to their pastors. A young couple who are fighting over money, they talk to their pastor. Watching an old couple grapple with aging and how to try to manage a budget, sometimes having to decide between cutting their medicine in half or what they're going to eat. And then middle-aged people dealing with their parents who are aging and helping to decide, are they going to finally have to give up their homes and cars and live in an assisted living center. You see people when they are born and the greatest moments of their family's lives, and you see them when they die. You're there when the news is given to a family that their 10-year-old is dying of cancer, and you're there when they unhook the machines. So there's nothing that you don't see. And I do believe that it gives you a perspective on the realities of humanity that very few people ever witness.
Very interesting. On the topic of religion, where is religion's place in politics? It's very controversial. Issues such as abortion, gay marriage, they come up a lot, and it's often religion and politics are often tied to morality. So, in your opinion, what is religion's place in politics?
Well, the founders were pretty wise. The First Amendment basically has two simple premises about religion: that the government should neither prefer nor prohibit the free exercise of religion. It's real simple, and that's all they said. And the restriction was not on the people, and the restriction was not on the church. The restriction was on the government. The government is forbidden to pick one religion over another and say, this is the church you have to attend, or this is how you're going to worship. The same token, it is forbidden to prohibit people from worshiping as they please. It's to give people the maximum freedom and to give government the maximum restriction. That's really the purpose of the First Amendment. So as it relates to law, everybody has a worldview. Everyone. Doesn't matter whether a person is a raving evangelical or a very devout Catholic, or whether a person is an Orthodox Jew, or whether a person is an outspoken atheist. All of those points of view have a worldview. They have a frame of reference. Any person from any point of view who runs for office and gets elected will bring his or her point of view. Now, what they aren't supposed to do is to impose a specific religious practice on everybody else. For example, if I'm elected, I can't help being who I am and what I believe. But I shouldn't try to say, okay, everybody now has to tithe their income and give 10% of all their earnings to my church. And I can't tell people they have to go to church on Sunday and they have to pray a certain way. None of that can be done. But it shouldn't prohibit me from praying or tithing or worshiping. That's the whole point.
Yeah. So on a slightly different topic, as a young Republican, I often have some few doubts about the future of the party. When comparing them to the Democratic Party, and we see a strong leader of politics aside of Barack Obama, it seems like there's great leadership and strength of the party. So what does your forecast look like for the Republican Party, and does the Tea Party fit in?
The Tea Party's been good for the country and kind of reminding us that government can't spend a bunch of money it doesn't have, borrow a bunch of money it can't afford to pay back, and that's been good. But no one segment ought to feel like that the Republican Party is uniquely theirs. I think sometimes people forget that the basic difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is the role of the individual. To the Republican, a person who really understands it, it is that our freedoms and individual liberties are just that. They're individual. They are not given to me as part of a group. I don't have it because I'm a male, or because I'm white, or because I'm Baptist, or any of those things. I have it because I'm a unique individual. And every other person has those basic liberties as well. Sometimes the Democratic Party tends to see people as parts of a group. So they fight for women's rights. They fight for the rights of minorities, or they fight for unions. That's fine. But Republicans would say, wait a minute, no one is who one is because of the group. They are who they are because they're unique as individuals. And that's an oversimplification, on its face.
Right.
But I do think that Republicans tend to think that the individual has more of the answers. Democrats tend to think that the government has more of the answers.
And speaking of the Democrats and government, what's your take on how Obama is handling, or the lack thereof handling, with issues in the Middle East in places such as Libya and Syria?
I've been very troubled by the policies, particularly in the Middle East. And I've been all over the Middle East. And I've started going in 1973 when I was 18 years old. And I've been to Israel 15 times. I've been to Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and Afghanistan and Jordan and pretty much any place in the Middle East. And what I think there's been is a policy of naivete that sort of assumes that it's more dangerous for the Israelis to build bedrooms in Judea and Samaria than it is for the Iranians to be building bombs. Because we put more pressure on Israel for freeze on settlements or communities. Well, I find that somewhat disingenuous because we got Ahmadinejad who's over there building nuclear weapons as fast as he can find a way to do it. And that really is a threat. I don't know that the bedrooms in a community really threatens anybody.
And if you could do it differently, what actions would you take?
I would recognize the United States can't solve everybody's problems. From a foreign policy perspective, certainly we would want to offer humanitarian assistance where possible and appropriate. But the primary purpose of the United States government is to protect the United States interest. And that means protect our borders, protect our people, offer some aid and assistance when it's possible to do it, but never feel like we can be the policeman of the world and that we can go and intervene. And frankly, I don't buy into the idea that we can export our version of democracy and freedom and that it is always transferable to a culture that may not understand how freedom and democracy looks to the individual. Because there are a lot of cultures that have been historically under dictatorships for so long that to simply say, oh, you know what, we're going to just have an election. Well, an election, if you end up electing Hamas, as they did in Gaza, that doesn't turn out very well. So it may not be that electing the government is all that desirable if the government that's elected is worse than the one that was thrown out.
Right, exactly. And as a last question, will we see you running for president in 2012?
Well, Ryan, it's possible. I'm still very much considering it, and I've made sort of the time frame for me to look at it in this summer. But I might. I haven't ruled it out yet, but I haven't made the decision to jump into the water and swim yet either.
Yeah.
What I'd like to ask you is, what advice would you give to a college student who's really passionate about politics and journalism?
Mark Twain was once asked what advice he'd give for aspiring writers, and he said, I have 3 pieces of advice: read, read, and read. That's the beginning. That's the same advice if you want to be involved in politics. Second, read history. When I'm dictator of America, the only permissible college major is going to be history. So we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And don't be afraid to be partisan. That is, partisanship's good. It means you're bringing the weight of passion and principles and convictions to public affairs, and that's healthy. Read good journalism. Read good writers. People with good prose style. Because the American people are so busy and bombarded with so many messages and claims on their attention, they're not going to read you if it isn't fun. And if it's not going to be fun if it isn't well written. And by that I mean witty and pretty. And these are not mere ornaments to writing. These are writing. So you ought to find people with good prose styles. P.G. Wodehouse, the novelist. Murray Kempton, the journalist. People like that.
What is it like to go in front of a camera or to publish a column that goes under such scrutiny?
It's like being a surgeon. If you don't like it, you can't do it. After a while, the camera loses its terror, and you just have to understand that on television, what you're doing in strangers' living rooms, and they don't want a scene in their living room. They really do want civility. So if you bear that in mind, that people are inviting you into their homes, behave accordingly.
What would you say was maybe the most transformative experience you've had? Like, what was the point at which you said, like, this is what I want to do? Like, this is how I want to spend it?
That's a good question. I'll give you a funny answer. I grew up in central Illinois, went to Trinity College in Hartford, arrived there in the fall of 1958, got on a train to go down to New York early on, plunked down a nickel, and bought a copy of the New York Post. And they had a wonderful columnist named Murray Kempton. And I read him and I said, what fun. And I sort of traced my interest in being a columnist back to Kempton.
What do you enjoy discussing the most?
Baseball. But aside from baseball, politics and governance, they're not separable. Two parts of the same civic enterprise. And I'm just wild about American politics and history. It seems to me being born in America is one of the greatest. All of us who are born here or immigrate here have won life's lottery because it's just so much fun.
How has perhaps your background with political philosophy informed the kind of journalism that you do?
Well, it's interesting. I did indeed go to graduate school and got a PhD, intending to teach, and did briefly, at Michigan State and the University of Toronto. And some people might say, well, gosh, you went and got a PhD and now you're not teaching, so you wasted your time. Not at all. What I learned in studying political philosophy is applicable every day to what I do. Every day. There isn't an issue that comes up in America that can't be traced back to the worries the founders had and the debates we've had since the founding and to the long Western tradition of political philosophy that preceded the founders. So I have a feeling that I'm doing exactly what I set out to do.
How has your career in journalism changed over the years?
You picked the most unflattering angle, by the way, but that's all right. It's fine. How has my career in journalism changed over the years?
Changed over the years, yeah.
You know, I started as a one-man band, basically, like right out of college. I made a fake press pass. Actually, I had a friend make a fake press pass, and I borrowed a home video camera, and kind of like that camera, actually, a little bit bigger. And I just started going to wars by myself. So, you know, I did that for like 2 or 3 years, and I did a lot of really stupid stuff, and took a lot of really dumb risks. But I was very, very lucky, and so it's changed. I mean, from I used to be sleeping on the roofs of buildings in Somalia and watching Dan Rather and Christian Amanpour drive around with entourages and vehicles, and kind of dream about having a vehicle one day of my own and a story. So it's to suddenly be working for CNN and have the capabilities of CNN behind you, and to be able to go and cover the some of the biggest stories of our times. It's pretty cool.
Could you possibly recount one of those stories from your earlier years? Anything specific you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I literally remember I worked a lot in Somalia in the early days. There was a famine in '92 and '93, and it was one of the first big stories I ever told. And I was literally all by myself. I had a backpack full of like some cashew nuts and videotapes and cash, and was there for a couple days telling stories, shooting stories. And I remember seeing I was sleeping on the roof of the airport in Mogadishu, waiting for the U.S. troops to land. And I remember watching Dan Rather doing live shots, and I remember he had like security and he had vehicles, and I just sort of. It seemed so beyond anything I would ever have as a reporter, because I was all by myself. I was just kind of faking it, and So it was, a few years later to be, I now know Dan rather, and when I go to a place, I have vehicles, and so it's nice to kind of realize, okay, it's sort of paid off, you paid your dues, and you're able to go and cover these amazing stories.
Okay. Do you have any advice for your students in the future as they move into this world?
Advice for students? I'm not very good at giving advice because, I think, I think people should follow their gut in terms of finding something they're really passionate about. My mom, when I was in college, in a sheer act of desperation because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I asked her about what she thought I should do, and her advice was follow your bliss, which at the time I thought was kind of esoteric and cheesy, but in retrospect, I think it's actually very good advice. It's hard to figure out what your bliss is and what it is that's really going to make you ignite your passion, but if you can figure that out and make a career out of it, I think that's the true road to success. It's the road to certainly to happiness, because if you love what you're doing, then it's not going to feel like work, and you're going to be more successful at it because you're going to be able to work harder than anyone else. And I guess that's the other piece of advice. I would just, no matter what field you're in, but particularly for journalism, I would just advise never underestimate the value of just out hustling everybody else, just working longer hours, showing up before everyone else does, and staying later than everyone else does. And it's the only reason I still, frankly, am employed by CNN. Early days there, I had a pretty rough time. I was on the way out, and it was only by kind of working harder than other people that I was able to stick around.